Hey everyone, I'm Zach Ward, and I've been a web developer and instructor for the last 3 years. Teaching is something I'm extremely passionate about, and today I'm excited to walk you through a tutorial on implementing React context in an application. Let's dive on in. In this tutorial, we'll begin with the React application that I've already set up using Vite, though you're welcome to go ahead and use any other setup that you're familiar with. Our starting point is this app component, and if we take a look at it, it's rendering our home and profile components. If we look at our home component, it has the steps that we'll need for consuming and creating context. And if we look at the profile component, it's just a simple H1 with profile page. With some basic CSS styling, which I'll give you in the write-up below, we have the foundation in place here to focus on implementing context. Okay, the first thing we want to do is create our context component. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder within our source here and call this context. And within my context folder, I will create a new file, and we're going to call this, let's call it auth provider.jsx. All right, for our auth provider, I'm going to go ahead and import a couple things. We'll need React. Let's go ahead and import our useState hook and our create context hook, both of which come straight from y hit equals from React. Okay, now we need to export a new variable, and I'm going to call it auth context so that we can consume and create context. And we're just going to set that equal to our create context hook. I open up my parentheses, and that's it. Now we've created a new variable, which has created context for us. Now we can set up our auth provider function like every other component. We'll export default the function auth provider, and it will receive props. But within our return statement, we're not just returning JSX elements here. Now we want to use our new variable to build a new component here in auth context. And if I hit dot, you see consumer and provider automatically pop up there. We want this to be the provider, and it's going to be an open and closing tag. Now, inside of this open and closing tag, we need to pass some JavaScript, which will be our props.children, so that any child component of our context provider will have access to whatever values that we want. So for us, let's create some state within this default function, and we'll call this state, let's just call it username. It's set username. We'll just set that equal to our useState hook. And let's just set it default to, let's say Tony Stark. Okay, so now we have this variable or this state, which is a string, Tony Stark, and we want to be able to consume it in any component that we want to. So we're going to pass this state to a value property inside of our provider, just like this. And we use two curly brackets, one because it's going to be an object, and two because we are accessing JavaScript here inside of our JSX. So now our context provider has a value, and right now it's an object with just one thing, that is the username. Okay, so if we're looking at our important steps to remember, we've created context component, we've exported the data through the value property, and now we need to wrap the app in our context provider. We could do that in the app component, but then we'd have to wrap two components. So I prefer to go to our main or our index component here, and let's just wrap our whole app in this context provider. So I will import our auth provider, and I will wrap our whole app component in that provider. And now our entire app, or anything that our app component renders, has access to anything that we pass out in our context provider, which right now is just our username. Okay, now the fun part, let's consume context into our profile here to dynamically render this H1 from profile page to our username, Tony Stark's profile page. So we'll go to the profile component. We need to import the useContext hook, which is also from React. And we need to import the created context file, which was called auth context, not the provider, the context. And then we want to destructure that object so that we get a good variable name that we can work with. So we'll open up our curly brackets here, pull out that username. We'll set that equal to our useContext hook, open our parentheses, and pass our auth context. Now we have this destructured username, which we can use now. So I will pass in that username here in our curly brackets. We got Tony Stark profile page. Let's fancy it up just a bit. There we go. Tony Stark's profile page. We have consumed context from our auth provider, which is username. And if we change this in any way, say we change this to Bruce Banner. And look, Bruce Banner is updated on our profile page. So we have dynamically consumed context in our profile component. Now, just to show its flexibility or versatility here, we can also consume context in our home component. If we wanted to change this H1 to welcome Bruce Banner as well, let's follow the exact same steps for practice. Let's import the hook first, which is useContext. Let's import the file, which is authContext. Let's destructure the username from the useContext hook from our auth context. And then now let's just add some curly brackets, pass in that username, and voila. Now we have Bruce Banner at the top. Welcome Bruce Banner here and Bruce Banner's profile page. Both of these components are now consuming context. And if we change it in one place, let's change this to say Michael Jordan. We update state. And in both places that we have consumed context, it is changed as well. Okay, real quick recap. The important things to remember. First, you need to create your context component. Export your data through the value tag. Make sure that you're wrapping your app inside of your context provider. When consuming context, make sure you import two things, the useContext hook and the file you're trying to pull context from. Make sure that you're destructuring whatever value you're trying to pull out of context so you have an easy variable to use. And then you can use that variable anywhere you want to within your JSX, and any change to that state or value within their context will update in every place. All right, that's it for now. Hope that was helpful. We'll see you soon in another video.